Donald Trump extends the Iran nuclear agreement, but warns the US will withdraw if changes are not made. But can this deal be renegotiated? And why is Trump adamantly against it? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. This is a last chance. That is the message US President Donald Trump has sent out after extending sanctions relief to Iran. Trump has aggressively warned European allies he would withdraw from the 2015 nuclear agreement altogether if his demands to change it are not met. Trump has publicly branded the deal before and during his presidency as the worst ever. Well, Iran says his announcement is a desperate attempt to undermine a solid multilateral agreement that is not renegotiable. In the middle of all this are European leaders who have essentially said to Trump either back the deal or come up with a better one. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Seyed Mostafa spoke to people on the streets of Tehran and sent this report.
Nearly 2.5 years after the nuclear deal was signed, many Iranians say they haven't seen any real benefits, and that President Hassan Rouhani promised more than he could deliver.
The nuclear deal has had no impact at all in my life. The price of rice has doubled, meat is expensive, we pay millions in rent. Meanwhile, the children of officials sleep like the people don't exist. Money didn't go to my pocket or to the pocket of the woman selling things on the street or to old people.
But some are still willing to stand by their president.
Rouhani is doing his best. Of course, there are some problems in the country. Sanctions, pressure from abroad, naturally it impacts livelihoods and the economic situation. But if we just blame the president and say he is the one who has to do something, of course, he cannot. We should stand next to him, cooperate with him and tolerate the situation.
The nuclear deal had some success. The lifting of sanctions let Iran sell oil again freely on the international market. Exports are up to more than 2 million barrels a day. But gains have been overshadowed by US President Donald Trump's aggressive stance towards Iran. Every few months, the Iranian nuclear deal is thrown into chaos, and managing that political turmoil takes up so much of the Iranian government's time that there isn't a lot of room left for public discourse about much else. Trump has created so much uncertainty about the nuclear deal that Iranians say it's been as harmful as sanctions that the deal was meant to lift. Many people are frustrated that foreign investors are too scared to come to Iran, and the value of their currency keeps falling.
Trump is a person who has a psychological problem. His opinions have no balance on any issue. He's always changing his mind. And for me, as an Iranian, and for most Iranians, it doesn't matter if the US pulls out of the deal. As long as European countries cooperate with us, we will stay in the deal.
Some Iranians don't care about the nuclear deal at all and say they simply want to get on with their lives.
I just want to make people happy. That's it, and I don't care about anything else. Making people happy is a kind of art, and I'm not interested in these kinds of nuclear conversations.
Iran's government says it's ready to deal with any scenario. So too, it seems, are its people. Seyed Mostafa, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Let's take a closer look at the Iran deal. It's a landmark agreement signed between Tehran and 6 global powers: the US, UK, Germany, France, Russia and China. Iran agreed to reduce its enrichment of uranium, eliminate enriched uranium stockpiles and modify a water facility so it can't produce materials suitable for a nuclear bomb. In return, decades of international and US sanctions have been suspended, and the US president has to sign a waiver every 120 days to keep suspending the American side of those sanctions. Trump is now demanding the deal include other weapons programs and tougher sanctions. He also wants to remove a clause that allows Iran to enrich uranium after the year 2025. Well, turning to our guests now, and joining us from Tehran, Seyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm, a political commentator and specialist on Iranian domestic affairs. In London, Ellie Geranmayeh, a policy fellow with the European Council on Foreign Relations and the author of the book Engaging with Iran, A European Agenda. And in Washington, D.C., Ali Vaez, a senior Iran analyst with the International Crisis Group. Very warm welcome to all of you. Ellie, let me start with you, because Trump has thrown the ball now to Europe. How is Europe going to keep this deal alive?
Well, the European parties to this deal several days ago had a very important meeting in Brussels where they came out with a unified message that they are going to remain committed to this deal, and that importantly, so long as Iran carries on its part of the bargain, they will do their best to deliver on the deal as it was envisaged originally. Now, I think everyone in Europe understands and acknowledges it's going to be very difficult to keep the deal going if the United States backtracks. So their effort for the next 4 months, which is this deadline that their closest ally in the US has issued to them, their main efforts are going to be to keep the US administration on board with the deal and find some sort of a solution that accommodates both Iran's needs and the US needs. But if need be, they need to also consider contingency plans to keep this deal together absent the United States.
So just to be clear, they're going to spend the next 120 days trying to keep the US on side rather than, as Trump wants, renegotiating the deal with Iran.
Well, the Europeans made very clear in Brussels, and they have been consistently making it clear to the US president since October when he decertified the nuclear deal, that this deal is not up for renegotiation. There has been a possible space and suggestion given to doing some side agreements with Iran that address some of those areas where President Trump seems to be most fixated on, which is missiles programs and the issue of so-called sunset clauses. But before the Europeans can even consider that, they need the full commitment of the US to this nuclear agreement. I think their priority for now will be to keep the US on board, but at the same time, in parallel, they should be looking at contingency plans whereby they can offer Iran a P4+1 deal that keeps the obligations in place on both sides.
OK, well, we'll look at that P4+1 idea just a little later in the programme. First, though, I just want to go over to Ali and see how difficult it's going to be to keep Trump on side in the deal with the Europeans as it stands. I mean, how close was he to walking away from it?
Look, I think the administration has, in fact, committed a mistake by coming out with a set of maximalist demands to impose on the Europeans and others in a very short period of time, in 120 days. Remember, this deal took more than 13 years of a nuclear standoff and 2.5 years of very intense negotiations to arrive at a very delicately balanced agreement. And now the president wants to basically impose a set of maximalist demands on everybody else. And interestingly, during the past 2 months, that some of these measures and provisions that the president has in mind were being debated in Congress. Both the Europeans and the Democrats in Congress had made it clear to the administration that these measures, like extending some of the restrictions on Iran's nuclear program forever, or tying the ballistic missile program of Iran to the nuclear issue, are non-starters, and these are considered violations of the JCPOA. So I think there is no chance whatsoever that there would be progress by the next deadline on May 12th.
So, Seyed, is Iran at all interested in finding a way of keeping Trump, of keeping the US in this deal?
No, Iran has been complying, with all its undertakings ever since the deal was struck. This has been the United States that has been defying its undertakings ever since it started. I mean, at the time of Obama, he didn't stand up to the changes in the visa waiver program. Also, he never stood up to the Congress when they, reimposed the Iran Sanctions Act. So Iran has been in full compliance with its undertakings, but it has not received anything. In the meantime, there are many in Tehran who even foresaw Trump's ultimatum in January. Since last summer, they knew that Trump would go for this way because this is Trump's strategy. But there is nothing in that for Trump to drop the deal, you know. When Iran has been in full compliance, the United States, has not lost anything. At least it has removed, some parts of the sanctions on paper, but not in action. And they don't have any replacement if they are really honest about Iran's true intentions for developing a nuclear program. They don't have any replacement for this deal. In the meantime, reimposing the old sanctions would not bring anything to Donald Trump but global condemnation, because right now they have already enforced a second generation of smarter sanctions against Iran, and they are already working on version 2.5. So focusing on the first generation would not do them much, and it would not bring Donald Trump any more credit. So basically, there are many people here who do not see this threat very alive and, creditable.
Okay, Ellie, is that a view that's echoed in Europe, that it will not do any good for the US to back off, either to the US, to Iran, and to the rest of the world?
Certainly, I think the Europeans see this deal as really for the benefit of global security and regional security in the Middle East. And so they have repeatedly made that position clear, and also said, as the UK Foreign Minister said recently, that those who've been opposed to it have no better alternative to put on the table. Now, from the European side, they are very concerned about what the US president does, because if the US were to actually go all the way and terminate the deal and snap back the sanctions, that would have a huge impact on the ability of European companies, as things currently stand, to do what is legitimate within the EU laws to do business with Iran. So it does have a big impact on Europe.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my next question. If the US does pull out, can Europe stay the course? I mean, can we not keep going without the US? The US is isolating itself, but can't the rest of the world carry on?
Certainly, since President Trump's even election back in November 2016, given his position on the deal, there has been work quietly happening behind the scenes of, what are Europe's options really if the US does terminate its obligations under the nuclear agreement. There are some thoughts put in place. Organizations like myself and ICG, where Ali Vaz works, we've been looking at different types of mechanisms whereby Europe can have a contingency plan, and that would really be based on giving Iran an economic package together with Russia and China, the other parties to this nuclear agreement, whereby there can be some sort of economic benefit given to Iran absent the United States. Now, for that to work, the heart of this debate will really fall on whether the European governments can forcefully and effectively ring-fence and protect their companies from the enforcement of US secondary sanctions. And that's where the debate is going to fall.
Okay. Well, just to throw it back to Iran for a moment, what does Tehran think of that contingency plan? Is that a discussion that's going on in government circles right now?
Well, as regards Tehran, Tehran has, stressed that it would not go for extending the deal after the sunset clauses and after its expiration. It would not also discuss its missile and regional powers. But that was a very correct point that my colleague was making in Europe. Europeans have so far shown political support for this deal, but that's not enough, although it was necessary. When the time arrives, if it arrives, when the U.S. reimposes sanctions or, forces Europeans to, comply with the CAATSA sanctions, then Iran is waiting to see if Europeans would protect these companies in dealings and transactions with Tehran. So practical steps are needed to be taken by Europeans to protect their companies. And that's exactly, the yardstick and the standard and the real action that Tehran is waiting to see to decide about the future of the deal. If not, Iran would surely, drop out of the deal, because that would mean the European companies and countries would, comply with the secondary sanctions of the United States, and the deal is gone.
Okay.
If they take action, sure, Iran would go along with the Europeans.
Ali, 2 points there that Seyed mentioned, the ballistic missiles program and the sunset clause, which allows Iran to return to enriching uranium in 2025. These are the 2 points, aren't they, that Trump is particularly upset about and that makes him call it the worst deal ever. But is he alone in the US administration in thinking this? Or how much of the White House supports him in this move?
No, he's not alone. There are a lot of concerns about Iran's ballistic missile program, even in Europe. And even some Democrats who voted for the nuclear deal are concerned about the outer years of the agreement when some of the restrictions start fading away. But, you know, if the objective was to renegotiate or negotiate a supplemental agreement that would come into force after the JCPOA expires, then the administration should have adopted a completely different strategy. It should have implemented this agreement in good faith and worked with its allies to try to come up with a follow-on agreement. The problem is this administration turned every milestone in implementation of the JCPOA into an uncertainty generator, which has really alienated the Europeans and totally evaporated any amount of trust that was built during the nuclear negotiations with the Iranians. And if you look at its approach at the moment, is not really talking about another multilateral negotiation with the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Europeans. Is talking about Congress changing US domestic law to basically unilaterally alter a multilateral agreement, which really amounts to a violation of the JCPOA. And the president is basically telling the rest of the world, you either join me in violating this deal or I will do it alone. And I think under these circumstances, the Europeans and the Iranians have much more to lose if the deal falls apart than to try to salvage whatever of the deal remains if the US withdraws from it. And try to wait until cooler heads prevail in Washington.
Just on a little sidebar, Ali, why does the US have this sanctions waiver that must be signed every 120 days? I mean, it really does make the deal vulnerable.
Look, these are sanctions that were put in place by Congress. And because most of these were enacted when a Democratic president was in office, the Republican-dominated Congress didn't trust that the president would be tough enough on Iran and wanted to have a regular way of monitoring and supervising the enforcement of sanctions and making sure that the president doesn't give too much to the Iranians. No one, I think, imagined that we would be in a situation that there is a president in the White House who can't be trusted by the rest of the world. And one of the things that Congress considered was to actually reduce this burden of very regular, frequent certification of the nuclear deal by the Trump administration. But again, the problem is the administration has put the bar so high that it's almost impossible to be reached.
Okay, Ellie, what are we hearing from other partners, China and Russia, about this?
Well, the Russians have been quite vocal in the aftermath of President Trump's statements to say that these were deeply unhelpful. China has been relatively quiet in recent weeks, but it has also publicly and privately made its position clear that it supports the nuclear agreement and continued implementation on both sides. And, you know, it will be very important for Europe to try and actively work with Russia and China, despite other problems that it has with both of these countries, to try and find a way to salvage this deal and also keep the United States on board.
So let's just take a brief look at these protests that have been going on recently in Iran, because they have affected people's perceptions of the country and its current climate. People have been angry there because they haven't seen their standards of living increase, despite a number of years now of sanctions being lifted. People on the street are not feeling their lives improve. Iran, as we heard in Zain's package, is now able to sell 2 million barrels of oil a day. So where is that money going?
Well, unfortunately, when I said the United States has been defying, its undertakings under the deal, one part pertained to the same fact that Iran could sell oil, but still the SWIFT doesn't work, and Iran cannot, bring back the money to Iran, to home. And they are going for swapping currency deals as well as barter trade and many other ways to bypass these sanctions. And the U.S. Doesn't allow even to foreign embassies like the South Korean embassy to use the banking ties in order to, budget their activities and operations in Iran. And that's a major problem. People now have come to realize that the U.S. is not an honest, actor in the deal. And that's why many are opposing it. I mean, the public opinion, as well as politicians in here from across the camps, they believe that Iran should no more go for any other deal with the West because the results are already clear. That's why, even if I have to mend my answer to the first, to the last question, that even if Europeans protect their companies and remain committed to the deal away from the United States, if they drop the deal, in Washington, Iran would go on with the Europeans, but there might be some changes, small changes. Iran has 4 options available under such cases, and it's not yet clear which option it would take. What Mr. Zarif, the foreign minister, has already stated is that Iran would not abrogate the deal, but it might, choose from the other 3 options that it has, like, modifying some of its undertakings under the deal. All this is a result of the change in the public opinion towards deals with the United States and the behavior of the United States. Because, I know we are short of time, but let me explain this a little bit. In and outside Iran, the thought that the United States is trying to, go for talks in order to resolve the differences with Tehran. But now they have come to realize that the United States has not been after resolving differences. It's only been trying to contain Iran's components of power. So they have come to realize this much better. And there are some protests about the economy, but riots are completely different. We're short of time. I cannot explain about that, I know.
Okay, no, but that's good. We get a good sense of the situation there in Tehran and the idea of how Iranians think towards this and towards the US. I'm wondering, Ellie, whether there is a common ground here that can be found between Trump, which, as Ali says, is very maximalist, and Tehran. Is there a deal that can satisfy both sides here?
Well, I think here the European position becomes more critical than ever in trying to bridge these growing tensions between Washington and Tehran. I think that if 2017 was the year where Europeans spent trying to figure out if President Trump is on board and if the deal sustains itself in its current fashion, 2018 has to be about Europeans proactively fixing some of the problems to do with the current implementation of the deal. And that includes opening up some of the channels for economic engagement with Iran that should exist as envisaged by the nuclear deal, but hasn't been able to be forthcoming. And part of that is really the banking and financial sector connections that is very critical for Iran to meet its goals for job creation, for foreign investment that will be critical to some of President Rouhani's economic policies. And Europe, with its economic market, can have a big role to play in that. And at the same time, I do think that the Europeans, and President Emmanuel Macron of France has made this very clear, will also be looking to very robustly engage with Iran on other issues of outstanding concern, particularly on the region.
Ali, just in the last minute that we have, 4 months from now, do you think we're going to see Trump again threatening to kill this deal?
Look, this president, if there is one thing that is certain about him, is that he's totally unpredictable. But I really think the administration's logic here doesn't work because it says its priority is to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. It admits that there is a nuclear deal in place that has put a lid on Iran's nuclear program, and Iran is fully committed to its obligations under that deal, and it's still doing everything in its power to undermine that agreement. Okay, very interesting indeed to hear from all of you. Thanks very much to Seyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm, Ellie Geranmayeh, and Ali Vaez. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story.
From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.